Hey guys, welcome to Storm Revelation. I'm your host, NP Rose, and today we're gonna just review the attachments that we talked about from the last video. I did release a video in between that time because it was spirit led. So if you haven't seen it, it's basically talks about the enemy that we sleep with this, which is ourselves. And there's a message in there that relates it to the biblical story of Samson and how we relate to Samson, or I can relate to Samson in a lot of ways. And that particular video gives a great insight about how you are your own worst enemy that you sleep with. And so today we're going to talk about disorganized attachment, which is also called fearful avoidant attachment. But before we get into the actual disorganized attachment phase of this segment of the video, I'm just going to give a recap as to what we talked about from the previous video. Not the one that I released in between, but the one from the Sunday before. So we talked about secure attachment. And basically what we said was secure attachment: when a child is separated from the parent, they seek comfort from that parent when they're frightened, and they greet the parent when they return with positive emotions. And the preference is the parent instead of the stranger. And as an adult, they grow into having a very trusting, lasting relationships. They tend to have good self-esteem. They share feelings with their partners and friends, and they seek out social support. Now, with ambivalent attachment, that child may be weary of strangers. They may become greatly distressed when the parent leaves. However, they don't find comfort in the parent when that parent returns back to them. And that adult is reluctant to become close to others. They worry that their partners don't love them, and they become very distraught when the relationship ends. Avoidant attachment characteristics. As a child, they basically may avoid the parent. They don't seek as much contact and comfort from their parent, and they show little to no preference for the parent over the strangers that they were encountered with, or the strangers that they were presented to. And as adults, they have problem with intimacy. And the word intimacy means intimacy. So they have problems with intimacy. They invest little emotions in social and romantic relationships, and they're unwilling or unable to share their thoughts or feelings with others. And then we talked about disorganized attachment, which is also called fearful avoidant attachment. And during the video, before I get into the disorganized attachment, we talked about the character of God. And one of the things that I said was God answers our cries. And I said to refer to Genoa. There is no Genoa in the Bible, okay? That was my bad, my mistake. It was a tongue twister on my part. And actually, it's Noah. It's Noah chapter 2, verse 2 that gives you an insight that God answers our cries. And then we're going to go into a little bit more about how God answers our cries as well. And then I also gave a whole bunch of other passages about how slow God is to anger and rich, and how he's rich in love. And we can find that in Psalm 145 verse 8, how he comforts us as a mother comforts her child. And we can find that verse in Isaiah 66 verse 13, and how God has compassion on us as a father has compassion on his child. And we can find that in Psalm 103 verse 13. And the reason why I threw those verses out there is notice how God is comparing his comfort, his love, his mercy, grace, and compassion the same way a parent shows compassion to a child. And this is what every parent should be doing. And this is why knowing or having an idea of what attachment does to us gives us better insight on how to self-reflect and how we can overcome those attachments so that we don't allow those to basically direct our path as to who we should be, and we allow us to be able to let go of that so that we can walk into our destiny. So let me go ahead and go into talking about disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment styles. So basically, this particular person has this attachment style, usually has to do with some type of trauma or traumatic or very severe or adverse experience that that person experienced anywhere during childhood. And when I mean childhood, I don't necessarily mean a toddler or a child. They could have experienced this within their teen years or late teen years as well. So from the time that you're born all the way up until your late teens, about 19 years old, you can go ahead and experience trauma. Most of the time, kids that are greatly affected by this usually are children that experience trauma before they become adolescents, okay? Or this person can develop this type of attachment, disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment, due to extreme inconsistency growing up. So this is the parent not giving a consistent pattern of fulfilling that child's physiological and psychological needs as they grew up. And so the child ends up developing this state of confusion or apprehension that makes them develop the characteristics of this particular type of attachment. And so basically, this person learns no real coping skills or strategies and is basically incapable and unable to deal with the events and with the rain that usually happens in life. And as we biblically know, the Bible tells us that it rains and the sun shines on those who do good and those who do bad. And that's a part of God showing us his mercy, that he does not differentiate what we go through, but he can lessen the blow if we allow him and if we take him into that storm with us. And so some of the signs that you may see that person experience depression, anxiety, frequent outbursts of erratic behavior. They may have poor self-esteem and poor self-image. They may also inflict self-hatred, and this is you being your own worst enemy. So they also end up struggling from healthy attachment with their own kids. And so this cycle ends up being a perpetual cycle of dysfunctional attachment because that parent never actually sought help. That parent never actually got over their trauma. So now it's bleeding into the lives of their kids. And so people with this type of insecure attachment generally have trouble making emotional connections with other people. They can be very aggressive and unpredictable towards their expression of love towards others. And their behavior is actually rooted in the lack of consistent love and affection that they experience as a child. And so because they don't know how to channel that, they didn't know how to process that, now they're actually displaying the very same behavior that their parents displayed towards them. And so the one passage that I want to share with you before we get a little bit deeper is I want you to think about this passage. I want you to think about Proverbs 4, verse 23. It says, the emotional attachments you make determine the course of your life. Now, this is biblical. Now, based on all of the things that I've told you about attachment styles, this passage is the epitome of knowledge or wisdom and understanding. This is God's word from the beginning of time. before he put breath into us, before he gave us a soul, he ended up telling us that the emotional attachments we make determines the course of our lives. It determines the course that you're going to take. And it's very true based on all the information that I've given to you. So I want you to write down this Proverbs 4 verse 23. The emotional attachments you make determine the course of your life. And everything that I'm saying, speak the truth to that passage, and it relates very so much to that passage. Now, let's talk about some of the symptoms that anybody who experiences this type of attachment can go through. These are the individuals who end up bullying others. These are the individuals who end up hurting others because they themselves are hurt. They end up experiencing extreme clinginess and dependency when it comes to their emotional connection with other people. These are the people that fail to smile because they're so hurt inside that they don't feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So there's no reason for them to smile, because when you smile, that means that there's peace and joy in your life. And if you have no peace and joy, then you're not gonna smile. These are the individuals who have very intense bursts of anger. And these are the individuals who lack fear of strangers. They lack affection from their caregivers. They're oppositional when it comes to their behavior. So these are the ones who always end up getting into trouble. These are our delinquent juveniles, boys and girls who end up getting into trouble with the law. They defy authority, and this is where their oppositional behavior comes from. They have very poor pulse control. They have very poor impulse control. They have very poor impulse control. They engage in self-destructive behaviors. They like watching others play, but they may refuse to join in with them. And they have a very withdrawn, a listless, very emotionless, or sad and depressed, lack of emotion, numbness, detachment type of a mood and behavior. And these type of individuals struggle academically, they struggle socially, they struggle emotionally, they struggle behaviorally, and most importantly, they struggle spiritually. Okay, they're very at high risk for developing legal issues during adolescent years. And these children with these attachments basically end up developing very low IQs, and they may have trouble overall with language and developing the language that they need to develop. And so what we need to understand is a lot of times the cause behind these type of behavior really has to do with physical abuse. Whether that abuse is sexual, whether that abuse is physical or emotional, that child ends up having caregivers with poor parental skills. The parent may have anger issues. The parent may have been neglectful to that child. The parent may have had some type of psychiatric condition that they themselves are still struggling with. The parent may have had exposure to alcohol or illegal drugs. The child may have been a product of foster care as a result of the parent engaging in neglectful behavior, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. The parent also may have spent time in an orphanage themselves. And the child, of course, may have experienced multiple traumatic events. And the caretaker ends up experiencing that as well. And so they're unable to form a bond with that child. And so why is it important that you actually know what this attachment style does? Because that attachment style actually creates an identity for us. And whenever we have inconsistencies and the people who are around us, and if we have inconsistencies in how we're loved, if we have inconsistencies of what we believe our self-worth is, then we end up attaching these labels and these identities to us that don't really belong to us. They actually belong to our parents, who themselves ended up having that same attachment from their parents because of trauma and events that happened to them that was never actually dealt with. And so the identity we end up putting onto ourselves, because remember, our soul, which, by the way, in Hebrew, or in Greek, actually, not in Hebrew, it means actually two things. It means breath, which is the breath that God put into us, but it also means psyche. And when translated into the English language, it means psychology. So our soul is what makes the psychological component of us. So it's our affection, it's our mindset. And our affection and our mindset determines the decisions that we make, which influences our will. And our will is what makes us make the decisions that we make, and makes us choose good or bad, and makes us choose the path that we're going to take. And in essence, that also influences what we do with our bodies. So that's why repairing our souls is so important. That's why these attachments attaches to our souls, attaches to our mindset, attaches to our emotions, and makes us make decisions that we typically would not make, because we're carrying an identity, we're carrying labels based on the situation that we were placed into, and not based on who we actually are in God. And so, because we've experienced traumatic events, and everyone goes through something in life, okay, whether it's in childhood, adolescence, or as a young adult, or even later on in life, we're all gonna go through rains. And so that rain are trials and tribulation, but that trial and tribulation was never meant for you to go outside of it, outside of God's presence. It was always meant for you to go through the storm while God is walking with you. You're not supposed to go in front of God. God is supposed to go in front of you and prepare the way for you. But because of our trauma, and because of the attachments and the identities that we basically glue onto our souls, whether it's shame, whether it's failure, whether it's feeling unworthy, whether it's feeling loneliness, whether it's feeling depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, whatever it is, failure, whatever it is that you've attached or glued to your soul, you need to be able to let go of that. You need to be able to allow God to come in and fill in that void. And what we tend to do is our emotions affect our mindsets, and our mindsets end up determining what we're willing to do. And we end up engaging in behaviors that we believe is going to fill that void. But can I tell you that that void that you're feeling is an empty barrel? And that barrel basically has a hole at the bottom of it. And the more you engage in that behavior, you're able to pour into it, into the barrel, but that behavior that you're engaging in that filling of the barrel is temporary and very short-lived. Why? Because there's a hole at the bottom. And every time you fill that barrel becomes empty again. And so you have to continuously engage in that same behavior to get that same gratification, that same fulfillment, only for you to feel empty and void again. And the only thing that can plug up, or that can fix or create that bottom of that barrel so that it no longer leaks anymore, so that whatever you fill it with stays full or filled, so that it can overflow, is God's presence. And it's his presence through the Holy Spirit. And the more you become filled, and the more you're in God's presence, the more repair ends up happening, the more restoration, the more healing you end up going through, to the point that you pour out all of the things that is not of God, and then you start walking into the identity of God. And so the shame, the hurt, the guilt, whatever it is that you've created a mindset for, and that your heart has developed an emotion or an attachment or a glue to, I'm letting you know that you need to let go of it. Why? Because we're carrying on a facade and a garment that don't belong to us. And one of the stories that I want to share with you is David and Saul. Now, in this biblical story, David is going out to slay the giant, right? Goliath. And Saul says, wait, before you go, let me give you my garment of war so you can put on you so you can go fight. And as David starts to put on this garment, he sees that this garment is ill fit. He sees that this garment is basically making him unequipped to go out and do what God is calling him to do. And that was to what? To slay Goliath. God had already equipped him prior and was already preparing him prior, because he had already slain bears and lions already. So God was already preparing him for this giant. Had David put on the garment that did not belong to him, that belonged to somebody else, the identity, and that garment was not David's identity, that garment was Saul's identity. That garment was who Saul was, not who David is, and not who God called him to be. And so had David left that garment on, then he would have never fulfilled his destiny. And so what is this story telling you? This story is telling you that you right now, based on what you've gone through, based on what you've allowed to be glued on to your soul, to your emotion, to your mindset, is affecting the destiny that God is asking you to walk into. And in order for you to be able to be who God has called you to be, that garment that you have on right now, that identity that's linked to your trauma, that's connected to whatever traumatic event or emotional experience that you have gone through, psychological experience that you have gone through, God is telling you that's not your identity. And you are basically putting on that facade. You're putting on that facelift. You've basically had surgery, and you are holding on to something that's not yours. You were never meant to hold on to what the world attaches to you. Okay? And so God is telling you that you need to let go of it. Let go of that garment that belongs to Saul. Let go of that garment that belongs to the world, because God is telling you that in order for you to walk into your destiny, to walk into your purpose, you have to let go of that. Because had David walked out with Saul's garments on, he would have never slayed Goliath, because God had already equipped him with the tools that he needed to defeat his enemy. And God has also already equipped you to defeat your enemy. And sometimes that enemy is you. And so all you need to do is let go and come before God and let God do what he's going to do, and let God purify you. Let him fill that empty void that you've been trying to fill yourself, because you know it hasn't worked. You know that you continue to go through the same cycle. You continue to go through the same emotional dysfunction, the same relationship dysfunction that you've always gone through. So are you going to be the one to break that generational curse? Are you going to be the one to say, my parents put garments on me. My trauma put garments on me. And now I'm going to let go of that garment, and I'm going to walk with what God is going to equip me with so that I can fulfill my purpose. And God is going to turn my imperfections into perfection and use me anyways. And so I want you to understand that your attachment traumas is not who you are. And I know personally because I'm a living testimony of that. And again, I wouldn't be here before you sharing these insights with you had I not been a living testimony. And I can tell you from a very young age, from the age of probably around 5 years old, I should not be here right now. I should actually be dead because I fell from a 2-story building. Okay? I fell from a 2-story building on gravel. And it was a neighbor who saw that I fell, who rushed me and my mom to Jackson Memorial. And I was in a coma. And I should not be here right now. But God had his hand on top of me. From the very beginning, I should not have been here. From the very beginning, the enemy tried to remove my purpose. The enemy tried to deter me from walking into my destiny and me being in front of you right now. And that wasn't the only thing that happened. I experienced lots of other traumas growing up as well. And I can tell you from experience that your trauma is not who you are. In light of your trauma, God can still use you because he tells us that he can turn our bad into good. He can turn that light that you don't see at the end of the tunnel. He can turn your darkness into you being a lighthouse in order to guide others. But first you need to build an internal bridge. And that bridge is by self-building yourself. Because there's no way that you can lead someone if you yourself are lost. Where are you leading them to? Because that's what your parents did to you. Your parents were lost. So now you're lost. Don't let your kids and your kids' kids be lost as well. So God is calling you to break that cycle, to break that chain, that bondage, that captivity that you've been in. He's telling you that he's going to bring down your prison walls, but you have to walk in obedience with him. You have to willfully make that decision and say, God, here I am before you. And say, God, I'm going to allow you to be my Jehovah Nissi. I'm going to allow you to be the banner that walks in front of me. I'm going to allow you to go in front of my storm so that I know that you're going to give me the strength that I need. I know that you're going to give me the willpower. I know that you're going to fortify me and equip me in every single way because you are with me. And if you are with me and for me, then no one can be against me. And in the moment that I am weak, you are made strong, but it needs to be in the presence of God. So what are you doing right now? Have you made the decision to allow God to be your Jehovah Nissi and to be the banner that walks in front of you and to be that person that you allow God into your storm because he wants to turn that bad into your good? Because God tells us that he has a plan for us, a plan to prosper us. But the only way that he can do that is by you making a self-conscious decision that you're going to stop being your own enemy. And the garment that you're wearing, that the world has put on you, that your experience has put on you, is not going to define who you are right now in this moment. You're going to allow God to transform you from Abram into Abraham, which is your God destiny self. Okay? So go ahead and leave a comment at the bottom of what you thought about this video. I would love to hear your feedback. If you like the video, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you have not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so that you can go ahead and receive notifications every time I post a video. Thank you so much for joining. You have a blessed one, and don't allow your enemy to dictate your God future. All right? All right. Thank you for joining in. Have a blessed one. Love you guys. Bye.